Receiving an allowance without having to tackle any household chores is a pleasant perk. However, the routine sarcasm from my mother-in-law, Julia, at 32, and working as a web designer often dampens the experience. Sharing a home with my husband, Ethan, and my mother-in-law has its challenges, especially considering our differing perspectives on work and domestic responsibilities. Originally part of a corporate environment, I transitioned into freelancing after marriage, a change welcomed by both my employer and me. The familiarity with my previous company ensures a steady stream of projects, sparing me the hassles of commuting and allowing more concentrated effort on household tasks. Despite the satisfaction on both ends, my traditional mother-in-law doesn't share the enthusiasm. She harbors a belief in the conventional role of a wife as a homemaker, a viewpoint she expresses regularly. Despite my husband's attempts to reason with her, asserting that contemporary couples support each other, my mother-in-law remains resistant. According to her, my freelance work is merely a side job that doesn't contribute significantly to the household finances. Balancing my web design work with household chores during my free time hasn't impressed my mother-in-law. Her dissatisfaction stems from the stark contrast between my non-traditional approach and her expectations of a more conventional housewife. In her eyes, I may be perceived as the outsider who, in her mind, stole her only son. Since my husband's father passed away 5 years ago, my mother-in-law has become increasingly dependent on him. While this seems to slightly bother my husband, there's a subtle satisfaction in his acknowledgement of her reliance. Our current residence, acquired by my late father-in-law 30 years ago, now solely belongs to my mother-in-law. The mortgage was settled through life insurance, and the house layout conveniently accommodates our small family, providing me with a suitable workspace. Despite the occasional tension, our home becomes a gathering place for my mother-in-law's friends who have been part of the neighborhood for over 3 decades. When her friends come over, the dynamics in the house take on a different tone. Taking a break from my work, I play the role of a gracious hostess to my mother-in-law's friends, offering them coffee and sweets. Yet, every gathering of similarly aged women inevitably transforms into a session of complaints about their daughters-in-law. In the midst of such discussions, I can't help but chuckle as they detail their grievances. My daughter-in-law, they say, frequently returns to her parents' house over trivial matters, spending half the year away from us. According to them, she is financially irresponsible, causing even our son to be at a loss about how to handle her financial habits. Debt collectors have even paid us visits. The conversations in my workspace often take a humorous turn, with my mother-in-law's friends seemingly competing over who has the most challenging daughter-in-law. Rarely do they praise their daughters-in-law. If by chance one of them offers a compliment, saying, "Your family's daughter-in-law is wonderful. She manages the household while working," my mother-in-law responds with a disgruntled expression, dismissing my work as nothing more than a side job. Amidst the laughter and gossip, my mother-in-law loudly questions the worth of my job, wondering aloud how much I actually earn. The discussion shifts to the spending habits of daughters-in-law, contrasting their personal expenses with the notion that the husband's earnings are meant for the family. The room erupts in laughter at this notion, reminiscing about the unthinkable nature of such discussions in the rear days. Unable to endure the repetitive tales of the past, I find myself seeking solace elsewhere. I drown out the noise with headphones, focusing on my work. The modern-day daughter-in-law, myself included, often becomes the target of belittlement, making it unbearable to listen. One day during a family dinner, my husband suggested buying a new car. My mother-in-law, quick to react, questioned why he needed his wife's consent for such decisions. Despite my husband's attempt to explain that it's a family decision, my mother-in-law insisted that he, the one with the driver's license, should choose any car he likes. Caught in the middle, my husband sought my help, and I diplomatically deferred the decision to him. The incident highlighted the ongoing dynamic where my husband always consults both me and my mother-in-law before making significant decisions, a practice my mother-in-law staunchly defended. While not inherently self-centered, my father-in-law had a penchant for making independent decisions, a trait my mother-in-law often lamented. My husband, raised by such parents, developed a belief in avoiding selfishness. On the contrary, my mother-in-law, influenced by the patriarchal behavior of my father-in-law, adhered to the notion that it was the norm. My mother-in-law's irritation towards my husband when he seeks my opinion circles back to me with accusations that I am always too strict. I found myself at a loss for words in response to her criticism, as it's true that I tend to voice my concerns rather than making decisions independently. To my surprise, my husband, aligning with his mother, blamed me for his inclination to check with me before acting. Months into our marriage, I realized that my husband never defended me in front of his mother, even when it was just the two of us. His apologies and claims of prioritizing me seemed less convincing over time. The recent incident of choosing a new car cast a shadow on our relationship. Initially considerate, my husband ultimately failed to support me in front of his mother. Concerns about our future together began to surface, and I pondered alternatives to the current dynamics. I wished my husband would not mistake indecisiveness for kindness, and I longed for my mother-in-law to express her thoughts more directly. A month later, my husband's new car arrived, and the enthusiasm was palpable. The joyous invitation for a drive and the admiration from my mother-in-law turned sour when the cost was revealed: $660,000. Shocked by the extravagant choice, I confronted my husband about the financial implications, only to receive nonchalant responses and an offer to use a loan. My mother-in-law, quick to defend my husband, criticized my complaints about the expenditure, stating that I had given him the freedom to decide. Frustrated, I questioned the feasibility of affording such a luxury, only to be met with my mother-in-law's sharp retort: "It's not like your pay, so you have no right to complain." Feeling unheard and dismissed, I argued that I contribute to the family income through my work. However, my mother-in-law, with unusual harshness, questioned the legitimacy of my earnings, asserting that my little side job couldn't possibly match my husband's substantial income of over $100,000 a year. She regarded me with contempt, and just as I was about to assert that my earnings supported us, I noticed my husband had disappeared. Tolerating this treatment for too long, I reached my limit. My mother-in-law's declaration echoed in my ears. "A daughter-in-law like you should just get out," echoed in my ears. It wasn't only her. Putting up with things and discussing my salary seemed trivial now. Angry at her words and disappointed by my husband's indifference, I felt he was to blame for our dispute, given his usual indecisiveness. Fed up, I declared, "Understood, then I will leave," and headed to my workspace to pack up my computer and essentials. As I left the house, I informed my mother-in-law that I would return for the rest of my belongings later. Her angry gaze followed me while my husband remained unseen in his room. As my mother-in-law screamed, "When you step into this house again, it will be after signing the divorce papers," I left without responding. Her abusive words, a first-time experience, bewildered me, but I chose not to engage further. Leaving my husband's house, I sought refuge at my parents' home. Surprised, my mother inquired about what had happened. Unable to specify, I lamented my lack of judgment and how my husband, who once cherished me deeply, had changed. Sharing the interactions with my husband's family with my parents brought some relief. With no children in the picture, my mother advised me to consider divorce sooner rather than later, given my financial independence. Over the weekend, with my father's help, I moved my belongings out of my husband's family home. My husband and mother-in-law remained elusive. Standing in front of my husband's room, I quietly spoke, "You took care of me for a long time. "Can you sign the divorce papers?" Slipping the documents under the door, I heard his indifferent voice. I signed it. "We're done here." As the divorce papers were returned to me, ending my marriage without a word to my mother-in-law left me with a lingering sense of sadness. After 2 years in a house filled with few happy memories, I decided to quietly leave and head to the city office to submit the divorce papers. If a piece of paper could resolve everything, then all the better. The plan was to stay at my parents' house for the time being and continue my work there. As I prepared to embark on a new life alone, gearing up for this solo journey, my mother suggested I stay with them for a while, stating it would be less worrying than living alone. My father, too, voiced his concerns, warning that Ethan and his mother could unpredictably show up at my place. Although I initially considered such scenarios unlikely, life at my parents' home proved comforting. Thankfully, my job flexibility allowed me to work from anywhere, so I decided to extend my stay at my parents' house for a while. 2 months passed, and just as my ex-husband and mother-in-law were fading into distant memories, an unknown number flashed on my phone. Initially hesitant, I thought it might be a mistake, but after repeated calls, I answered only to find my ex-husband's frantic voice on the other end. "Why do you answer the phone?" he asked, sounding confused. Ready to end the call, I responded that since there was no need for us to interact anymore, I would hang up. His next question caught me off guard. "Wait a minute, why isn't my smartphone working?" Without much interest, I suggested he contact the mobile phone company. However, a sudden realization struck me, and I inquired if he had been depositing money into the bank account I used to deposit my salary, along with his into our joint account, but it was always short due to the performance-based nature of his health product sales job. Normally, I would deposit money at the end of the month, but for the past 3 months, only his salary had been deposited. As the pieces fell into place, I left in the middle of the month, and the new car's loan payments might have kicked in. My ex-husband remained silent. "I've been managing the household with my income up to now. From now on, please manage your own living expenses," I calmly asserted over the phone. Inwardly, I felt the urge to say, "You reap what you sow," but I chose to refrain and quietly ended the call. It occurred to me that my ex-husband had never disclosed his true income to his mother. It seems she was unaware that our post-marriage livelihood was predominantly based on my salary. Perhaps my ex-husband was too ashamed to admit that his wife earned more than he did. Despite the general knowledge that basic utilities like electricity and water aren't easily cut off, it became evident that mobile phone service could be the first to go. One holiday morning, the house intercom insisted, signaling trouble. My father sternly informed someone at the front door, "We don't want to be involved with you anymore. Please leave." Sensing something serious, I rushed to the entrance with my mother. My former mother-in-law's voice sounded from the intercom, requesting a moment to talk. Tensing up, I faced her, and just as my father predicted, she had come to our home. Anger filled her face as she exclaimed upon seeing me. She blamed me for not making the monthly deposit, resulting in the electricity and water being cut off. We were all stunned by this revelation, unsure of what she meant. My ex-husband, attempting to intervene, declared, "Mom, stop it. Julia is no longer involved with us." However, his mother brushed off his hand, continuing her rage. "Ethan earns $5,000. How can this happen?" I corrected her, quietly revealing that the $5,000 was actually my income. Shocked by my declaration, she turned to my ex-husband. He admitted, almost inaudibly, that his take-home pay was about $500. My former mother-in-law stared at me in astonishment, and I clarified that my income was not just from an allowance but a regular job. She then asked about Ethan's take-home pay, and he responded about $500. After a moment of silence, she made an unbelievable proposition. "Julia, how about coming back?" It was a joke to ask, but I firmly refused, stating that we were already divorced and it was no longer my concern. Despite my refusal, she persisted, suggesting that everything could be resolved if I got back with Ethan. My father, in a forceful tone, demanded they leave and warned of involving the police if they didn't. They left hurriedly, stumbling away as my father warned them not to step foot in our home again. Reflecting on their unreasonable behavior, my mother was furious, but my father seemed even more indignant. I was relieved that we had cut ties. He had to give up his parents' house, including the land, and moved into a small apartment with his mother. The rarely used new car was sold, settling the remaining loan with the money from the house and land sale. Despite the loan being paid off, my ex-husband squandered money on gambling, and his whereabouts became unknown. My former mother-in-law was diagnosed with dementia and now resides in a nursing home. Meanwhile, I am doing well in my job and currently live alone. Recently, I started dating a man I met through work. He understands that I was previously married, and he is committed to his job, not relying on his spouse's income or indulging in extravagant purchases like my ex-husband did. While we haven't discussed marriage explicitly, I feel that we have a serious future together.